This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Abayim. We have a very special shiur today and this evening. Usually this shiur is zoicha to hear the Wednesday night shiur first, and then it's given in full color in the evening. But today we have two separate shiurim. So this morning's topic will be about the Rif, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi, while this evening will be the Chanukah shiur. The special Chanukah shiur will be tonight at 8:30. That's the only way to hear it. No, we're not giving you a preview today, so the only way to hear the Chanukah shiur is this evening at 8:30. Tonight's shiur is 10 special junctures and locations to pray for the spiritual, physical, and emotional well-being of your children. And related to the Yom Tov of Chanukah, as the Gemara tells us, Haragil Bener Havin Le Banim Talmidei Chachamim. But this morning's shiur is going to be about one of the great all-time halachic codifiers, someone who lived in Morocco, and one of the greatest pillars of the halachic process, the Rif. Some public service announcements. If anybody would like to get the new sefer on Shemos, it is now available. It has arrived in America. You could get it at our site, rabbidg.com, with free shipping. That is available. You could get the English sefer on Chanukah, the light and the splendor. That's available at local Svarim stores or at artscroll.com. It's now 20% off. If anybody would like to participate in upcoming Svarim, whether the upcoming Haggadah in English for ArtScroll, or if anybody would like to participate in the upcoming Sefer on Chinuch Habanim, please let us know. Tavei Aleichem Bracha. This morning's shiur is about Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi. On Friday, we learned about the episode of the Arba Shvuyim, and how there were four great people, including Rabbeinu Chushiel, who was ransomed and sold to Kairouan in North Africa, and his son Rabbeinu Hananel was what we call the first generation of the Rabbanim, first generation Rishon. Today we're going to learn about the Gadol, the unequivocal Gadol Hadar in the second generation of the Rishonim, namely the Rif, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi. Now, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi was one of the pillars of halacha. As we're going to see, is one of the three Rishonim with which the Beis Yosef weighs in terms of determining the halacha. So we're going to start with Maramakom number 7 in the Sefer HaKabbalah. Sefer HaKabbalah was written by Rabbeinu Avraham, known as Ravid the First. He was known as Ravid the First. His full name was let me get that for you. The full name of the Ravid is Rabbeinu Avraham ben David Halevi, and he was the Ravid the First. He was killed al Kiddush Hashem, and he tells us that Alfasi, Rabbeinu Yitzchak bar Yaakov of Alfasi means of Fez. We'll see why he was called of Fez. He was born in Kualat Hamad. See, he says Ben Min Kalat Hamad, and that's in Algiers. It's near Constantine. V'talmidim shel harav Rabbeinu Nisim bar Yaakov, Rabbeinu Hananel. He was a student of Rabbeinu Yaakov, of Rabbeinu Nisim and Rabbeinu Hananel. And what happened was, he was born in the year 1013. He moved to Fez, and according to the Sefer HaKabbalah, there were libelous charges that made against him when Rabbeinu Yitzchak was 75 years old. So Be'artzan Kalfa ben alanav v'chayim beno. There were charges made against him and his son. Ad shabarach v'nichnas b'Sfarad, until he came to Spain. He comes in the year Dalid Tuf Mem Ches, in the year 1088. Dalid Tuf Mem Ches. That's 1088. That was so he was 75 years old. You can imagine he was not a young man. This is talking about in an era where life expectancy, you're lucky if you made it to age 40. And v'chivdai, they honored him. V'nasu, the Yukaf Hanasi, he settled over there, and v'nasai Rabbi Yosef Hanasi ben Meir bar Shar Tamikash, and then ultimately he comes to Cordova, and then he goes to Al Yasana, or Lucina in Spain, and he stayed there until he died. He actually succeeded Rabbeinu Yitzchak ben Yehuda ibn Geyos, the Ritzag, who passed away in 1089 as the Rosh Hashiva, and he was Marbitz Torah in Lucina until the year 1103. And as we're going to see, so he wrote his commentary. When he came to Lucina, he continued to disseminate Torah to his students until the year 1103. So the Rif lived from 1013 to 1103, which is an extraordinarily long and prosperous and fruitful life. So just to give you a little picture, the Rif is 25 years old when Rav Hai Gaon died in the year 1038. And the Rif was a contemporary of Reb Nassan, the author of the Aruch. He was a contemporary of Rashi, who lived in France. But what's astounding about the Rif is what the Sefer HaKabbalah, Rabbeinu Avram ben David HaLevi, the Rabbi Arishon, writes. He says that he composed an abridged version of Shas that we're going to talk about soon. And from the time of Rav Hai Gaon, there was nobody like him in wisdom. So since Rav Hai Gaon, who again he passed away in 1038, nobody was as great as the Rif. Let's talk about what the Rif wrote. The Rif abridged Shas. So what he did was, he took out all the relevant passages of the Gemara that are used halacha l'maisa, and that's what he codified. He took out the questions and the answers. He took out many of the agaritas of Shas, and he just gives you basically the pertinent lines of Shas that are necessary to determine halacha l'maisa. So the Rif covers 3 sidarim of Shas, Moyed, Nashim, and Nazikin, and only the halachas that are Noigeya for the Galos, or after the Beis Hamikdash. He doesn't talk about Karbanos, and he completely omits Parak Hey through Parak Tes of Psachim, and the first 7 prakim of Yuma, which are all about Karbanos. But the halachas of Tumas Koyin and Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzos, and Tzitzis, which are in Menachos, are included, called halachas Ketanos. Now it's very interesting. Sometimes the Rif does quote Agadata. So, for example, he'll bring down the Agadatas in Kedushin in order for us to learn the importance of, let's say, Hilchos Kibbud Avayim. Or in so regarding Hilchos Kibbud Avayim, the Rif will bring down the different Agadatas. Or in the 16th parak of Shabbos, he quotes many Agadatas about Shabbos in order for us to have a heightened appreciation of Hilchos Shabbos. Or in Bab Metzia, where there's a reference to the halachas of Toichacha, so the Rif brings many halachas regarding the mitzvah of giving rebuke. But here I want to give you an example of where the Rif sort of sets out for us the proper approach toward Bavli versus Yerushalmi. And this is a very interesting passage of the Rif and subject. Now we know you're not allowed to make a sound on Shabbos with a musical instrument. In the Yerushalmi says in Beitza that not only are you not allowed to make a sound with a musical instrument, but any creation of sound through any means, even artificial means, like knocking on a door, even though it's not a musical sound, is asur. However, the Bavli says that anytime you make a noise that's not derech shiur, that is permitted. So in other words, everybody agrees you can't drum on the table on Shabbos or clap your hands. That everybody agrees to. The question is, are you allowed to make a noise that's not derech shiur? Allowed to knock on a door? The Yerushalmi is machmir, the Bavli is lenient. Now there is an opinion, Ula, in the Bavli, who's machmir, but the conclusion of the Bavli is that you're allowed to make noise on Shabbos if it's not derech shiur. So the Rif at the end of Eruvin, and number 2 on your sheets, he brings that we see some Rabbeim, they hold like Ula, and they rely on the Yerushalmi that has a girsa in Beya, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Kol mashmi'a kol asur b'Shabbos. Any noise at all is asur on Shabbos. However, the Rif says, Va'anan lo yisfiru lanhachi. We don't hold this way. Dikivan de sugya de Gemara dilan lehetera. Since our sugya in Bavli is lenient, lo yichbat lam b'may de Amar b'Gemara de b'nei Ma'rava. We don't care. Lo yichbat lam b'may de Asri b'Gemara de b'nei Ma'rava. We don't care what the Yerushalmi says. This is a very important principle. Once the Bavli says it's mutter, we do not care what the Yerushalmi says. The Al Gemara Dilan Samchinan. We rely on our Gemara. The Basrahu, our Gemara is the later authority. Ve'inu have a beki b'Gemara de Ma'rava. The Bavloim knew the Yerushalmi. Tvei more than we know the Yerushalmi. V'lav de kimlahu dehai meimra de b'nei Ma'rava lav de samchahu. Had the Bavli not held that Yerushalmi is not reliable, lo yikashar le'inu. The Bavli never would have allowed it. In other words, what the Rif is saying is that when the Bavli disagrees with the Yerushalmi, we follow the Bavli. The Bavli came later, they were well versed in the Yerushalmi, and if they did not asur it, that means they held that that's not a reliable Yerushalmi. But that implies that if there's no contradiction in the Bavli, the Rif would concede that we would follow the Yerushalmi. So an example of that, the Rif at the end of Masechta Rosh Hashanah cites the Yerushalmi regarding how many brachos to make in the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. Fine. So this was one of the great principles of the Rif. The Rif codified the Gemara. The Chida writes that the Bala Itur and the Bala Shumais bring tshuvas of the Rif, and the Chida says that he himself saw it. The students of the Rif were Rabbi Yosef Halevi ben Migash, the Ri Migash, also Rabbeinu Ephraim. Now, many Gedolim throughout the generations wrote commentaries on the Rif. The Chida brings Rabbeinu Yoina's son, wrote a commentary on all the halachas of the Rif. Rabbeinu Yoina made a parsha on the Rif, but it was only published on brachos, and the Shita Mekubet says, brings the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yoina on Ksubas. Rabbeinu Yehuda bar Binyamin Haroife wrote a parsha on the Rif. Rabbeinu Yehuda ala Madari wrote a parsha on the Rif. The Ra'ah wrote halachas of Rif. The Ra wrote a parush. The Ritva wrote a parush on the Hilchos Rif, like he says in his Chidushim. Rabbeinu Yishmael also made a parush on the Rif. Rabbeinu Tam made Hagoyis on the Rif. The Ran wrote a commentary on the Rif. The Nemuke Yosef wrote a parush on the Rif. The Rashbam wrote Hagoyis on the Rif. I don't think we have those. Rabbi Abba Mori Bar Yosef, the Ravo Iter. So the Chida brings 13 Gedolim who wrote a commentary on the Rif. By the way, in our editions of the Rif, you also have a commentary that purports to be Rashi on the Rif. The Ravid wrote Hagois on the Rif. The Baal Ho'iter, the Baal Hamor, Rabbi Zrachia Halevi. The Ramban defended the Rif. The Rosh wrote Likutei Upiskei HaRosh on the Hilchos Ketanos of the Rif. So the Rif was one of the most fertile halachic pillars from which many other Rishonim commented on. As we mentioned that when we started, when the Beis Yosef formulated his approach to halacha, he says that he decided in his mind that since the three great pillars that Klal Yisrael rests on in their Haira are the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh, he says, I said to myself that where two of those above-mentioned Gedolim have one opinion, we're going to follow them, except for a few places where every other sage disagrees, then we'll follow the other approach. But as we all know, the basic approach of the Beis Yosef was to take the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh, and to follow 2 out of 3. Moreover, it's interesting, the Rambam almost always agrees to the Rif. Very infrequently does the Rambam disagree with the Rif. In fact, the Rambam, in his Perush HaMishnayos, in the Hakdama, he writes about the transmission of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and how the Gaonim wrote many Perushim on the Talmud, but none of them were really sufficient to be a all-encompassing, exhaustive Perush. Some of them did not live long enough, some of them were too busy, some of them were not written in the right language. So, there were a few noble attempts, he says, the Bahag, and others, Rav Acha. However, the halachos are written by Harav Haggadah Rabbeinu Yitzchak, the Rif. That was the most sufficient, that was the most well-encompassing commentary on the Shas. Because he brings, Hispiku ba'ad kol hachiburim. Basically, the Rambam says that the commentary of the Rif was better than all of the above commentaries together. That was the greatest of all the commentaries, which is high praise coming from the Rambam. Again, the Rambam says that the commentary of the Rif is preferable to all the works of the earlier authorities because he clarified all the errors that could be found in any work that preceded him. And he says, Be'er kol hatoyos asher nimtzu asher hayu lefanav. Says the Rambam, Ve'ein tefisa alav behem ela b'halachos mu'atos. You can't challenge anything the Rif says, maybe in a few places, and it's not going to be more than 10 places that you could challenge what the Rif says. In fact, in a tshuva, the Rambam says that he disagreed with the Rif only in about 30 situations. So the Rambam feels you can't even ask on the Rif in more than 10 places in his whole commentary, and the Rambam, out of thousands of situations, only argued with the Rif approximately 10 times. In the Sefer Tzedel Adarech, Rav Menachem ibn Zarach, he talks about the greatness of the Rif, that Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi came, who was from Kalat Hamad. He came to Spain in the year Dalet Alafim Taf Mem Ches, which is the year 1088. So the Rif came in 1088, again when he was 75 years old. He was in Cordova, and then he went to Lucina, which is only 12 parsa from Cordova. It was a city that was entirely of Jewish origin, and they accepted the Rif over there because that city were all of Spanish exilees, and Rabbi Yitzchak lives there. And that's where he wrote the commentary of the Rif. And from the time of Rav Hai Goin, there was no one like him. His commentary, his compilation spread to the whole world, and amazingly, Rabbeinu Yitzchak, that's Yitzchak of Dampierre, the Ri Hazaken says that the human mind would tire to figure out how the Rif composed his commentary, unless the Rif must have had Hashras Hashchina in order to be successful in writing this commentary. He lived 90 years, and he passed away in the year 1103. He produced many Talmidim, most notably Rabbi Yosef ben Menashe, the Ri Magash. So the Ravid, the first says from the time of Rav Haigain, there was no one like the Rif. The Ri Hazakin said the Rif wrote his commentary with Ruach HaKodesh. The Ravid, this is Ravid the third, in his Hagois on the Rif, he says, I saw the works of the Rif wondrous, meaning there were certain things there that were beyond me, I couldn't understand. He says, maybe the reason I don't understand it, maybe the reason I can't see it, is because when you try to look at the sun, the raw sun, you're overwhelmed. It's so powerful. Maybe because of the Rif's greatness, I could not understand it. Maybe because of my weakness, I couldn't understand it. Truth be told, says the Ravid, maybe I'm better off closing my eyes and closing my mouth and just following whatever the Rif says to the right or to the left. That's the reverence with which the Ravid held the Rif. Of course, the Ravid ultimately does disagree with the Rif, but he presents it in these terms. There's an amazing sefer. The name of the sefer is Shailos Utshuvos Min HaShamayim of Rav Yaakov of Marvezhe. He was one of the Balei HaTosfos of the 13th century, and he asked the following shaila via the heavens. He said, regarding the bracha on tefillin, do we follow the Rif that if you don't talk between Shel Yad and Shel Rosh, you only make Lahaniach, and when you put on the Shel Rosh, you don't make a bracha at all? Or is a halacha like the Gaonim that say that even if you don't talk, you have to make 2 brachos on the tefillin, one on the Shel Yad and on the Shel Rosh, al mitzvahs. And if you spoke on the Shel Rosh, you have to make 2 on the Shel Rosh. So the answer that heaven shared with Rabbi Yaakov of Marvezhe is that Loi besabi tami v'loi bedardiki etza. This is paraphrasing the Gemara that tells us that Hashem was not pleased with the response of Avraham Avinu or Yaakov, and Hashem said, Ki Avraham lo yeda'anu v'Yisrael lo yakirenu ve'es brisi akim es Yitzchak. I will uphold my covenant with Yitzchak. Echad karasiv uv'chayri etneu v'avarcheu gam baruch yiyah. Heaven responded, Ve'es brisi akim es Yitzchak. We follow the Ravid that you only make 1 bracha on tefillin, which is amazing because that's not the halacha. We didn't paskin like the Shamayim on this one. But look at the great reverence that even in heaven the Rif was held, that we don't even paskin that way, but Shamayim paskin that way. Now, the Rif died in Lucena, so he was buried in Spain, but unfortunately there aren't really any kvarim that are still extant in Spain. But there is something amazing that we learn from the text of the kever of the Rif. It's very interesting. We have here that in the Sha'as Tshuvas Chasam Sofer, a question, Shalom v'chol tuv l'talmidei harav hamuflag k'void Rabbi Yisrael David. So we have the following she'ela over here. Chasam Sofer writes, Higiani divrei pai b'kiryas chutzos v'alachti l'nuach v'loi l'havi alai achrayis da'achirim gamin lisom b'chal tzorech. Basically what happened was there was a matzeva, and the nusach of the matzeva had names of Hashem. And the rabbi, the Rav of the city, said you should not put Hashem's name on the kever, because it says in Maseches Soifrim, Shem shekasav al even yishamei v'yiganes, that you shouldn't put God's name on a matzeva. And what happened was, they didn't listen to him, and they put the name of God on the matzeva, and the stone broke, the stone toppled over, and nevertheless they went back and they put it up with iron. So says the Chassam Sofer, blessed is God who stood up for the insult to the Talmud Chacham, for the people who rebelled against the rabbi and didn't listen to him. He's the Marda Asra. So therefore, God stood up for the Marda Asra, and he punished the people that the Matzeva fell over. But the Chassam Sofer says Hashem did not stand up for the Marda Asra because the Marda Asra was correct. No, the Marda Asra was wrong. The Marda Asra was incorrect. But even though he was incorrect, God stuck up for him. Why is the Marda Asra incorrect? Because you're allowed to put God's name on a matzeva. Avaladina ilu havinu asama yisi shal arav hamayra. What will you answer? What about the matzeva of the Rif? Say the matzeva of the Rif at the end of Seder Nizakin, there is published the matzeva of the Rif, and there you'll find 3 holy names on the Rif's kever: Elohim, Shakai, and Kel. Now the name Shakai, there's no other way to write it. So how would they write it? So it's interesting that if you look at the nusach of the matzeva of the Rif, that's published, I believe, as the Hakdama to the Rif in the back of Maseches Brachos. So you have the nusach written by Rav Moshe ben Ezra, as well as the nusach of what was written by the Rif's student, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, and there you have various names of God, Malache, Hakel, and you have Vitzel Shakai, Yoshev Gavhoi. You have various names of Hashem over here. So, amazingly, we learn out. Now we don't have the actual kever of the Rif anymore. It's not extant, but it was preserved and it's published in our Gemaras, and we actually learn out a halacha from there. Chassam Sofer says we learn out that the name of Hashem, if it's on a kever, it's not an issue. So the Rif, as mentioned, was the greatest of the Rishonim since the time of Rav Hai Goin. The Shas Tshuvas Min HaShamayim says that the Esbrisi Akim Es Yitzchak, the Riazakin said the Rif wrote his compilation with Hashras Hashchina, and he's one of the 3 Amudei HaHoira, one of the 3 pillars of Halacha that Kol Beis Yisrael Nishan Olav, that the entire Jewish people rests upon. Okay, Zechusay Yagin Aleinu. Please join us tonight at 8:30 for the big Chanukah Shiur. You don't want to miss this one. The special junctures in Tefillah that are an Eis Ratzon to daven for one's children, and one of them does not come up all the time. You really want to be aware of this and take advantage of the opportunities. So please join us tonight, 8:30, same channel, same address. If you want to come live, the shiur is delivered at the Young Israel of Woodmere. Have a wonderful day. Shkoyach. Bracha v'atzlacha. Rabbi, how are you?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.